So let's start, everybody. This is the from query letter to publishing contract now. And you're lucky enough to have the illustrious Matt Bialer, the superstar New York agent of all of us, plus Pat Rothfuss, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, or this weekend for that matter.
He means that Matt is also Pat's agent. Not that we have Pat, unfortunately he's not.
Okay. I'm not a very good writer. He had to edit what I said. But anyway, so why don't we go through and introduce ourselves, and then we'll get started with we're just going to wing it. So it's going to be kind of, if you guys are, who's a writer, who's a wannabe writer in here?
Whoa. I would assume, well, it's a panel about getting published. It would make sense.
Again, he edits.
I thought this was how to make a music video.
So let's start with our superstar agent and have him go.
Please don't say that. Just say the guy on the side of the angels. Well, I'm Matt Bialer. I've been a book agent I've been in publishing for 32 years, which is kind of strange to think of. I started at an agency called Curtis Brown. Well, let me backtrack. I was an English major. I thought I'd be in publishing, and I had a friend who got a job in publishing. Because she graduated early from my college, and so she said a literary agency is looking for someone. And I said, what is a literary agency? And she said, well, you know how actors and actresses have agents? I said, yes, because writers do too. And I was like, really? I never thought about that, No one ever told me that. So I became an assistant at a literary agency called Curtis Brown. I was there for about 2.5 years, and then I suppose you guys have heard of the William Morris Agency. It's a big entertainment agency. I went there in the New York book department, and I started as an assistant again, and then I eventually got promoted. And I had the feeling if they promoted someone, they'd want someone to do science fiction and fantasy, because no one there did. So I started collecting articles about the book business in that genre. And they did promote me, and they did want me to do science fiction and fantasy, so I started agenting, and then I've been there when Tad came along, like in 93, I think he'd been my client.
Yes, when we were both 6 or 7 years old.
And then I am now at an agency called Sanford Greenburger Associates, which is it's smaller than William Morris, and I've been doing the same thing for a long time, and I'll say this about writing, because I'll just answer this question right. I get many queries per week, probably in email, like 100 per week, I'm not exaggerating. And I have an assistant who looks through all of them, and she reads every single one, and if she thinks one is good, she sends it to me, and then we ask for the manuscript. So Scott is my poster boy for how he found me as his agent. I was at the World Fantasy Convention in Brighton, England, of all places, and I was at a Patrick Rothfuss event, standing outside of it. I think he had just done a reading. Scott just came up to me with his wife. He said, can I just take you aside for 1 second? I said, sure. He goes, I'm writing an epic fantasy novel. I'm not done with it yet, but can I send it to you when it's done? And that was like a year before, right?
Yeah, that was October 2013.
So he knew that I represented Pat, he knew that I represented Tad, and I said, sure, just put in the subject line and met me at Brighton, because otherwise I would never remember. So he sent me his novel, and then I liked it, and we went back and forth for many months. I have writers do revisions pretty often.
Oh yeah, that was years.
But the point is that Scott did some homework. I knew he was serious when I met him because he knew who I was. It just makes a big difference. If you're looking for an agent and you just scattershot it to everyone, most of the time they're not going to look at it unless you write an amazing query letter. So, and how do you find out who someone's agent is? In the acknowledgement section of the book. There's a website called publishersmarketplace.com. It's like $15 a month, and it's worth it because it tells you about almost every book deal in the business, who the agent is, who the editors are. And so you just check it out. You'll start learning what's selling, and you'll see what sells and who bought it and who sold it. It's a great resource. Okay, I'll shut up now.
Repeat it one more time, please.
The whole thing or just the website?
Publishersmarketplace.com.
I'm sorry, I was distracted. Could you start over?
So I'm Brian Lee Durfee. I'm the author of The Forgetting Moon, published by Simon & Schuster Saga Press. Clearly it was Matt who brokered the deal for that.
I brainwashed all three of these guys.
Yes. Well, so far I'm the only one that's really called you a superstar. Maybe these other guys will too. I don't know. Anyway.
He's our superstar.
Exactly. An agent is indispensable, and so you just, I mean, I don't know if, well, clearly I wouldn't get a book deal, and clearly you wouldn't get a book deal if we didn't have an agent.
Matt's story is different because he already had a few book deals.
Yeah.
And he'll tell you about that.
Yeah, so why don't you guys introduce yourselves? And
All right, mine will be quick. Matt introduced me a little bit, but I'm Scott Drakeford. I just signed a deal for a trilogy with Tor, thanks to Matt and his many years of helping me out with my manuscript. I know a little bit about writing queries and well, getting one agent. I only really queried him. I didn't send any queries to anybody else. But
you're batting 1,000%.
Batting
you know.
1,000.
I have a lot of rejection letters.
Well, that's not to say that the whole thing was easy, right? It was still several years of a lot of turmoil and crying myself to sleep. And I'm sure there will be more of that. But yeah, that's me.
And actually, Scott is a case of be careful of what you wish for because they want him to write his books fast and on the schedule. And I said, Scott has a young child, and I was like, be careful what you wish for.
Indeed. Yeah, it'll be awesome.
And hello, my name's Chad Williams. This is actually on. Doesn't seem to be. That was not even on at all. I'm a writer of fantasy and science fiction. Thank you. I'm a writer of fantasy and science fiction. I've been doing it for a while. Some of my experiences are kind of outsider experiences in terms of how I got started. But I do have some things to say about what we're going to be talking about. I had an interesting situation in that, unlike either Scott or Brian, I had I was an Over the Transom author. And that shows you how long ago it was, because I bet you very few people in this room now even know what a transom is. That literally used to be called Over the Transom, because the transom is that little window at the top of an office door. And in the old days, at night, people used to come and chuck a manuscript through those into the publishing office. So I didn't literally do that because that was in New York and I was in California. But literally, any unagented work in those days was called an Over the Transom book. We just call it now. What do you call it now? Unsolicited? Slush, yeah, slush. And I was fortunate in the sense, and one of the reasons you know how highly I think of Matt is I waited several years and into the fairly successful publication of some books before I picked an agent for myself, to the point where I actually had a choice. And Matt was the one I picked. So
Matt has the greatest story of why the publishers read his book. You have to tell the story. It's too bad in this electronic age it wouldn't work.
Well, okay, I'll tell you this one thing, which is, as long as you don't lie, cheat, or steal, as long as you don't cheat or steal, as long as you don't steal or murder, you can do anything to get people to notice your books, okay? So what happened in this case, mine, they already had the book. This is DAW, D-A-W, founded by Donald Walheim, and I had written my first book, and I sent it off, and I didn't know at the time that DAW was a very small publishing company. Kind of a family business in a lot of ways. Great publishing company, but not a lot of people there. And so I didn't realize that they had a kind of a thing everybody knew about how long it took to respond to manuscripts. I was brand new to the field. They were my second choice. Picked them out of the books, what books I saw on the shelves at my own home. I sent them a manuscript, didn't hear anything for months and months and months and months. So I wanted to make sure that they actually knew it was there, So I wrote this very pathetic letter saying, dear to whom it may concern, I sent you a manuscript called Tail Chaser Songs, half a year ago or so, and I wouldn't bother you except for the fact that we've had this terrible flooding in California. And our basement is entirely full of water, and I've lost my only copy of the manuscript. Now, I mean, this is BS for a number of reasons. Right? First of all, nobody in California have basements. You know? Second of all, the amount of flooding that happens there. Well, and, you know, I mean, we literally were in the middle of a famous drought at that time. And I figured, they're in New York. What do they know? This was pre-internet. Okay. So anyway, and so could you please send me a photocopy? I will pay for photocopy, you know, so you guys don't incur any expense, but I really need a copy of my own manuscript. So, again, I didn't know all the facts. So what happened is, duly, a couple of weeks later, they sent me a copy of my own manuscript, which I guiltily put on top of the copy that I did, in fact, have, because I had no basement. And only later on, they did, in fact, buy that book and published it, and my career started. And then, again, about half a year after that, I finally met the publisher, one of the two publishers at Daw, and her husband Peter, who's become one of these great friends of mine. And Peter said, you know, oh, I was so sorry to hear about your floods and all that. He says, yeah, we had one of those copying machines where you have to put each page on the glass separately. He said, man, that took me the whole frickin' afternoon. Wait, this is important here. He still doesn't know. So if I get home from here and get a nasty email from Peter, I will know one of you had loose lips.
How do you do this with email?
Now, you know, you have to think of new solutions. I don't know what they'd be yet, but I'll figure one out by the end of the day.
Well, since Tad edited a couple of things I said earlier, I'm going to edit what he just said, and that's he's a lot older than us. And
I don't think you have to do any editing. I don't think you need a red pencil for that.
And he's much braver, for sure. I mean, I went through the typical, I wrote a horror novel first, and I emailed it, or not emailed, this was back in the day when you actually sent stuff through the mail, to 100 different agents in New York, got 100 different rejection letters, but some of them had little encouraging notes, you know, like, hey, this is pretty good writing, you're on the right track, I just don't represent horror novels, good best of luck. So then it encouraged me when I got done with my epic fantasy to try the process over again, but instead of shotgunning this thing out to 100 people, I just picked the 6 top agents that represented fantasy books, and I got those names through, as Matt said, the acknowledgement pages of Tad Williams' books, Pat Rothfuss books. You know, I compiled the 6 best that I could see, and I emailed to them, again, mailed, and I got interest from 4 of those, and I signed with one of them. I'm going to be honest, the first one I signed with was not Matt. But this is a good lesson to learn.
Did you query me in the original 5, though? That's what I want to know.
Yes.
I answer.
With a form email saying, oops, sorry.
He was probably on vacation.
I'm assuming maybe it was the assistant. Maybe it was the assistant that rejected me. But here's a lesson for you aspiring writers, and this is going to be something that a lot of you might deal with when you start querying agents. Is I signed with a really reputable agent to begin with, and he was very excited about my book to begin with. And we went through a few editing processes, and then as he was just getting ready to send it out to publishers, he decided, like, you know, all relationships that are going really well, so suddenly one person ghosts the other one, and you just don't hear from them. And so after not hearing from my agent for about 5 months, I contacted Matt and said, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm represented by so-and-so agent.
You actually, if I remember correctly, were also asking me for advice on how to deal with the situation.
True that.
He was probably working up to ask you, hey, you live in New York, could you go over and kick this guy?
Yeah, I was, you know, it's a frustrating situation to be in, where you have an agent that's really an awesome agent, and then he just stops returning your emails. This is typical. This is a typical thing that happens in the business. Now,
I think that agent was also going through some stuff business-wise, like he had split off.
Yeah, that's true.
From the
yeah, that's true.
agency he was at, and I think he just was distracted.
And I have no,
In his defense.
I hold no malice towards that guy. In fact, I acknowledge him in my book, if you ever want to know his name. I acknowledge him in my book as being one of the people that really helped me shape the novel into the work, the publishable work that it was. Now, I friended Matt on Facebook, and we had a mutual interest in art and things like that. And when I was having trouble with the agent, I started asking Matt for advice. And finally, I just said, "Hey, would you be interested in reading my manuscript?" And I conveniently, just nicely, and divorced my other agent. And
One of the things, if you don't mind me jumping in here, one of the things that we're talking about now in a very personal and anecdotal way also makes a good rule for writers who are trying to break in. And that is, any contact that you make with officialdom or with the industry, whether that be with an agent, whether you go to conventions and meet editors, whether you submit to a magazine or to a publishing company with an unsolicited manuscript, as I do, first of all, don't let rejection kill you, that's obvious. But more importantly, if you get any kind of personal contact back from these people at all, anything other than the barest sort of courteous no thank you, if they say anything about your writing or about your potential or anything like that, you got to have sticky fingers. What you do is you then politely and understandingly, and I'll explain why understandingly in a moment, but you have to politely but determinedly and doggedly try to expand that connection. Meaning, if somebody says to you, we're not really doing X kind of novel, but et cetera, I think you have some talent or whatever. Okay, so you write a very polite letter back, thanking that person for the time to talk to you, and saying, if you don't mind, may I ask you, do you know another place that might be good for me to send something like this to? Or, would you be interested in seeing another kind of idea from me, and you might even spin one if you've already got an idea that's more in their wheelhouse. And here's where the understanding part comes on. First of all, Matt of course is an agent, so he believes there are no bad agents, but no mean agents. But generally, he's right in that most agents are hardworking, serious-minded people. Same thing with the editors. They're not out to screw you. They're not out to be mean to you. They would love nothing better than to find a new writer who's going to become a huge bestseller and a cultural landmark for them. However, agents and editors also spend a huge amount of time looking at manuscripts, generally on their own time. Especially editors. I don't know if that's as true for you at this point in your career.
Totally.
Okay. So this is, if you see people on the trains in Manhattan, they're reading manuscripts because they're editors. They don't have time to do that at the office. They're doing it while they commute. They're doing that at home at night.
I'll tell you a funny story. I was on the subway in New York. This just happened to me last week. This woman sits down next to me. She is wearing she was wearing a baseball hat. She was like there. She was old, thin, and had tattoos all over her body. And she was wearing a baseball cap that said "Mama." And I just was. I actually had a physical manuscript because I lost my reader, and she said to me, "That's really bad." I said, "What?" She goes, "Are you in publishing?" I said, "Yes, I was reading a revision of something." She says, "Oh, that's really bad. I read a lot. There's too much dialogue." So I just closed up the manuscript and thought, I just can't read this in front of her.
You didn't hire her? I mean,
Well, I called my assistant, who's not a big fan of this author's writing, and she was like, "I told you so."
Well, the last thing that I wanted to go with that point is that, again, because these people are busy. So if they open the door to you a crack in any way, shape, or form, they're doing you a favor. If they've sent you anything in the way of feedback other than a simple courteous no thank you, take it, run with that, know that you're lucky, and do your best in a kind and understanding way to exploit it.
And
Go
actually,
after it.
Facebook makes that so much easier.
Yeah.
Look how, Brian and I were friends on Facebook. I knew he was an artist. I knew you were maybe an aspiring writer. I knew you more that you were a fan of tags. So I think we were on there for a few years.
Yeah, we were Facebook friends for a couple of
We
years.
respond to each other's posts.
Yeah, we were Facebook friends and we would like each other's
Yeah,
stuff.
so then
for
he
a little
approached me,
while.
so I already knew who he was, so I wasn't like, who are, you know, I thought it was genuine, like he wasn't.
Yeah. And at the time, I had another agent,
Yeah.
and so I wasn't like stalking him or anything or bothering him nonstop. And Tad's right. I mean, I think that everybody I've met in this business, even including the agent that it didn't work out with, genuinely loves books. They want books to succeed, and you know, business gets in the way, and things happen, and people get discouraged.
And it's
But-
political.
Yeah.
Like some books get more
But
attention.
my editor at Simon & Schuster, I mean, he's a marvelous editor. The copy editors they hired did an amazing job. I mean, you know, when you get your manuscript back and it's all marked up with red, a couple of things go through your mind when you're a new writer. At first you think, there's 30 to 40 red marks on every page of my 800-page manuscript. Why did they even pay me money for this? I mean, do they even think I'm good at all at this point?
Why didn't they just write it, right?
Yeah. That's the first thought that goes through your head. And then the second thought that goes through your head is, oh my gosh, somebody just spent a lot of time on my book to make it the best it can be. And that's almost like touching in a way, you know? I mean, and the editors, the book editors, the agents, the people like Matt, they're all in it to see books succeed.
Oh, yes.
And one last point, again, kind of working on the same thing. Not only are they generally nice, decent people who, if they're giving you any time at all, that's a compliment. Even if they're just giving you a few words on your return manuscript saying, you might want to work on your characterization or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But the other thing too is, I mean, they're human beings. So first of all, if you say to somebody, I'm sorry, your manuscript just didn't work for me or what we're publishing right now, and if you write them back a letter that says, well, you're an asshole. I mean, do you think that they're going to be really interested to see your next manuscript when you get to be a little bit better writer? But here's the thing you also may not know. Publishing is a very small business. Those people you're going to run into them somewhere else, even if you get into the field. You may wake up one day, even if you've made it, despite you being a jerk, you're going to wake up one day and they're going to be your new editor, right? Or your new agent, or whatever it might be. And news gets around. And if you're bugging people, and if you're insulting people because they're not treating you with the reverence you think you deserve, everybody's going to know. The entire, there's 8 million people in Manhattan. But every single one of them who's involved with books is going to know that you're a jerk. Every single one.
One thing I'll jump in with here is you want to give these guys a reason to give a shit about you, right? Like, they've got 100 queries every week, and we're probably going to ramp it up to 100, 150, 200 here.
No, but out of those 100, like, so it's just, I can tell from the first few lines that it's a no, because the letter's bad, or, this is the biggest, this is going to be the biggest bestseller since Harry Potter, things like that. It's just, I can tell they're just not educated in the business yet. So you have to be educated in the business. And it's easy to do because of things like Facebook. And also, I was just, go ahead.
No, yeah, you're good. I mean, I would just say, find the authors you like, find their agents like we've talked about, but in this information age, it's weird, but all these guys have websites, right? And on their websites, they have a list of all of the people that they represent or that they edit, whatever. Look for people who create things similar to what you're creating, and go after people who are gonna like your stuff. Like, it's not that hard, right? To develop that list of 5 or 6 people that are probably gonna like your stuff, and then give them a reason to care about your stuff.
And then another thing I was going to say is, if you're writing a trilogy, say, and you're submitting the first book or submitting queries for the first book, I would not work on book 2. I'd work on something else in case this doesn't sell, because otherwise you're working on book 2 for no reason and you're wasting your time. And you could always jump back into book 2 if book 1 sells. So that is a piece of advice that I don't see given that much. And I was going to say, I think I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I think joining a writers group is great. I find that people who come to me and get published often are in some sort of writers group. And again, because the internet, they don't even have to be in your state. You could do it all online and just find like-minded people, find people whose stuff you like and same interests, because it makes a big difference. You're a support system. You're hopefully being told the truth when something's not working, which is important. So instead of going to your friends who might not tell you that. So.
Well, speaking of not writing your second book before your first book is out, or at least have a deal for your first book. So, you know, I'm in my mid-40s now, but I started kind of writing my first novel when I was 12 years old, you know, compiling notes and writing little lines of dialogue and just keeping it. And so my first novel that he got me the book deal for literally took me 30 years. Oh, wait, I don't know. I'm not good at math. What's 12 in the middle of whatever? It was a lot of years that I spent writing that first novel, and then I get my contract for a 3-book deal, and they want the next novel in a year, and I was a little taken aback because I'm like, you do realize I spent most of my life writing this first one, right?
This is called second album syndrome.
And so I said, Matt, can you rework that? Can you rework that contract so it's every 2 years that I can turn one in at least? But we came to an agreement on every 18 months, which is still really fast for me. But,
the main thing about all of this, and if there's a central message, I suspect, that's going to be coming from all of us in many particular and you know, individual ways, but is to get informed. Get informed. You know the kind of fiction that you want to write. Actually, it's better to know fiction in general, but you know.
Yeah, I was going to say, read outside of your genre too.
That's a big hobby.
Learn a lot that way.
Read as many different kinds of things as you can because it will enrich your own work. But learn something about the kind of stuff you're writing. Know who some of the other writers are who are successful and read some of their work. Or not successful necessarily, but who are good, you know, that you find to be good writers. Learn something about how publishing works. You know, as Brian is saying, basically, although he's saying don't stalk, but what he's really saying is stalk people in a sensible way. You know, right? Don't literally stand outside their house at night watching them as they're preparing for bed. You know.
Here's the thing: is I knew well aware who Matt Bialer was when I friended him on Facebook, and I knew he already rejected me, and that didn't matter. I just was like, he's someone in the business, and it would be cool. I already knew his assistant had rejected me, but I knew he was in the business, and I thought this would be fun to follow him in the business. I mean, I also you know, friended Russell Galen and a whole bunch of other
very well-known agents.
Very well-known agents. I friend them all. You know, why not? Who knows down the road? You know, at least they'll know my name, right?
There's two different kinds of people who've come up to me over the years, of all the kinds of writers that come up to me or want to be writers. And I think that this carries over into the publishing side and the agenting side of things as well. Basically, two different kinds of writers come up to me. One of them is the kind who walks up to me at a convention and goes like, hey, yeah, you're a writer, right? I've got this great idea. I'll tell it to you. You write the book, and then we'll split the profits.
It happens every day.
Okay. The other kind is the person who comes up to me and says, I'm trying to get started, I'm working on my first book, or I finished my first book, and I want to find out, you know, how to get published. And here's what I've looked into already, and I'm wondering if there's anything you can say that might be useful. Now, you know, considering how many queries that I get from people about things like that, which ones do you think that I'm going to spend my time with? The person who actually seems like they've got a clue about how the world works and are not just kind of living in a fever dream where I'm going to do all the work and they're going to make the money, you know. So, you know, that's the main thing is learn. It's not just writing, because you could write the most brilliant book. You could write the next Ulysses or whatever, you know, you could write the most amazing book in the world. But if you can't get anybody to look at it and publish it, nobody's ever going to know. So you have to learn something about the part of the field that is getting your work out into the field as well. Not just simply the fact of writing, but how do I get my book to people?
There was a flood, I lost my file.
Yeah. Whatever works, baby. That's what I say. Whatever works. Should we, because there's so many writers in the room, Brian, you're the mayor.
Oh yeah, we were gonna open it up to questions.
Why don't we go early to questions, because we'll probably have some very specific
Absolutely.
things.
Let's start with questions. If you have a question, there's a microphone up here. Why don't you just line up behind the microphone and we'll...
Or if you feel confident that you can project
That looks like we got a line
to
now.
the back of the room, then you can just stand up after people standing up there.
Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Specifically, right now, there's a big push. There are a lot of people trying to independently publish. It's a lot easier now, cost-effective, different things. Matt, for you specifically, and then others can address this as well, I'm just curious now how you would view someone that did independently publish, who tried something like that, and then maybe it didn't work out, or maybe they have a different idea that they query you with. Is that a negative, a positive, or kind of a neutral thing that you want to look at?
It depends on the situation. Like I think most people in publishing, I'm not talking about myself necessarily, view the self-publishing that most of it is bad. So they go into it with a negative view. So I've had self-published authors come to me, and one of them was actually pretty good, and I tried to sell him real hard. He had like 100,000, maybe 150,000 copies that he sold. That he was a really good promoter. He got a quote from Stephen King even, but they just said they didn't think he was good enough. They kind of go into it almost skeptical, like it is a bit of a strike against them sometimes. But there's a writer named Jeff Bialer. He's a fantasy writer, and he has self-published through Amazon, and then Amazon took him on, and he is just making so much money doing this that he doesn't want an agent or another publisher, at least not yet. He might change his mind, but he's very good. He's sort of a little bit like influenced by Terry Brooks. So I think self-publishing, I would not do it as a way of attracting publishers. I would do it just as a way to get your work out there because you tried the other way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was a great question, by the way.
Yeah, it was.
Other than personalizing each query letter to who you're sending it to, is there any difference that you can think of where you'd want to send it to an agent versus a publisher in formatting?
You're more likely to get an agent to answer you than a publisher, so I would try agents first, because some publishers just say we don't accept unsolicited manuscripts. In fact, probably most of them do that at this point.
Yeah, there was one publisher in Publishers Week Marketplace that advertised that they would take the full manuscript without an agent, and so when I sent out my 6 query letters to the 6 best agents, I also sent the manuscript to this publisher, and they got back to me 5 years later and said, "We're interested." Remember that, Matt?
Yeah.
Remember that? But Matt had already got me a book deal. So that's the lag time.
And it was the place where you most wanted to be.
An agent's going to get back to you within a week or 3 months. A publisher's going to get back to you in 5 years.
And I want to bring up something else that we haven't talked about. Some agencies charge reading fees. I would avoid them because it's a reading business. They're not really out to find clients. And the same thing with publishers. If they charge fees for that stuff, do not go in that direction.
I'm surprised actually, I'm not surprised because we haven't taken questions before this, but we haven't talked about query letters. And this, I'm going to ultimately refer this back to Matt since he deals with them far more often than I ever have. But don't worry too much about the structure or the whatever, the query letter. Make it simple, make it straightforward. Paragraph, 2 paragraphs, explain, because you're going to be sending some material usually with it. Not a whole manuscript, send a couple chapters.
And don't say it's going to be a bestseller. Don't compare it to the obvious things out there like Harry Potter, because people will just roll their eyes if you do. But if you say like, I think fans of Tad Williams and Brian Lee Durfee and Patrick Rothfuss and Scott Drakeford might like this or whatever. Just you reference things that make it look like that it's outside of the obvious, that you do read pretty deeply into the genre.
Also, for instance, a lot of times, because I used to read Slush for Dawn, so I've seen a lot of these things. If your own background is germane to what you're sending, like say for instance if you're sending a police procedural and you can say, I actually work for the such and such police department or worked in the homicide division.
Most definitely.
Absolutely. But I also saw a ton of query letters going like, I've had a really crazy life, man. I was in the circus for a while and then I did this and I did this and this and this. And yeah, my book is about these things that are just like hobbits, except I call them fuffles. What the hell does all the rest of that have to do? It just made me want to slap you. So, professional, literate, short. You know, because again, you're looking at people like Matt and his assistants and the publishers and their assistants that have to read dozens and dozens and dozens of these things. So you want to immediately just be polite, sensible, literate, and get to the point.
And I just met Brian's friend yesterday who she's writing a book that's relevant to her profession.
Yeah, Allison, stand up, I know you're here. Stand up and wave. Allison,
Oh, yeah.
Allison runs an antique toy store.
Now, you pitched me verbally and it left a big impression with me.
Yeah, I got to do that cool pitch thing. I've always wanted to do it. I'll be sending it over.
And you said that her background had something to do with it and therefore was a useful thing to bring up.
She sells collectible toys, and it has to do with, her query is a middle grade, I believe, that has to do with killer toys. Like toys that kill you.
It's how to be a 12-year-old toy killer. Isn't that a great title?
So we got
Yeah,
this here.
thank you. Just one quick note on the publisher versus agent thing. One big reason that I went with an agent is that, I mean, their job is to have relationships with the people that are going to get your book made and distributed, right? That's their entire job, and they're very, very good at it. The reason that I have a deal is because he's friends with one of the people who could buy my book, right? I don't have the resources available to go and make those relationships, make those connections with people in publishing. But I can query an agent.
Yeah, actually, I had a drink with an editor that was mostly about you, Scott. She's a friend, and she's not going to do me any favors, because she can't. But we were like on the bubble, and I think
But you know who's going to be most receptive, and you know who's going to absolutely not go for it, and you're not going to waste the time that otherwise would have to be wasted. Yes.
Feel free to send me the bill for that.
So my question is with, so I was a big fan of Anne McCaffrey growing up, and she did a partner writing with another author named Margaret Ball, who I'd never heard of, and they did the Acorn series, and because of that I was introduced to
I was the
Margaret Ball.
agent for the Acorn series. Not for Anne McCaffrey, though, for the series. It's a long story.
My question is, so if you have somebody that is a good writer but is really afraid to go into the business on their own, is finding an established author to write with a good way to do it?
It depends. If you can find an established writer who wants to work with you and wants to do the same kind of thing you want to do, absolutely. You know, I mean, that's like if you can find an agent who wants to handle you. Yeah, you know, that's your first in, that's your bad, you know, that's a great connection to make. The only time you want to be careful is, and I don't know how common it is anymore in the field, but there's a kind of sharecropping thing where there are people who think that that's what they're doing, but what they're really doing is taking, you know, essentially a synopsis or something from the writer and then doing all the work. And that could be dubious in terms of what value you'll get out of it.
Although it helped Brandon Sanderson's career.
No, but it can also work. That's why I'm saying it's not an automatic no-go. But yeah, if you can find a good writer who you connect with, there's a ton of things you can learn and gain from that kind of relationship.
It's a very small pool, though.
Thank you.
My question would be, is what sort of advice would you give to somebody who has trouble picking an age group to write for, or I guess query for, as well as a genre to query for? Because it feels like I fit in several different buckets when it comes to that sort of thing.
That one should be yours, Matt, I think.
I would go by two things. What are you passionate about, and what of those genres that you're interested in is doing the best? Like, I happen to think that people that want to get into YA and middle grade, I mean, when I first started as an agent, the children's book business was this, like, it was like Siberia. Like, it was just way out there. There were like 5 agents that did it. They each, I worked with this very legendary book agent who represented half of like Goodnight Moon, and she had all these classic books, but it was considered like a back, you know, like just totally out there. So Harry Potter completely, utterly changed children's book publishing, and it's huge. Like even during the recession, you know, a lot of book publishing was pretty hard hit, but not children's book publishing. So that is a good field to get into, but it's very, it's faddish, so something can be like dystopia was so in, now it's out. So you have to follow what's in and out because it's very cyclical in that way. I hope that answers.
I'm going to actually, I'm not going to disagree with Matt because that could have great consequences for both of us, you know. No, I agree very much with that, but I will say one thing, which is more from the writer's point of view. And this is another hobby horse of mine, just like reading outside the genre, if you want to be a genre writer. I'm a firm believer that what you have to do is find out what you really want to write about. And that will include ages, characters, blah, blah, blah. And that must, I think that is the most important thing, is to write the book that you want to read, whether that's, you know, your teenage self wants to read or your adult self or whatever, but find the book that you want to read and write that. Because ultimately, if you try to outthink the market, but you're not working in New York, you're going to have real trouble because the New York market is already 2 years ahead of what you're seeing on the shelves, etc. And the other thing is, too, it's kind of like what we were hearing about the first book, you know, we're starting the second book without having sold the first book. If you're going to spend a year or two on your first novel or whatever, and you're writing something you don't like very much, or you're not that motivated by it because, you know, you think the market wants it, and you don't sell it, which does happen even for writers who later go on to sell books, you just spent a year and a half writing things you don't like, and you won't be learning as many lessons, and you won't be becoming you as a writer in the same way. So also, it's the best way to judge whether it's any good or not. You write the book that you want to read, and then you pray, hope, assume, whatever it is, that there are people like you out there. So that's my suggestion.
Great, thank you guys.
Hi. So you guys have talked a lot about digging into the industry and really learning the industry. What's the best place to start for a beginner as far as reading certain books, online anthologies, or resources to start kind of almost like data mining what the industry is
Well,
really
it
about?
depends on what you want to write.
Okay.
Like you have to figure out, well, I want to write an epic fantasy novel, or I want to write another kind of fantasy novel, or I want to write a science fiction novel. It depends. Like, but I think whatever genre it is, you should read like the Tad Williams, or you should read the people that are good in it.
Sorry to interrupt. I think if you want to data mine something, I think the best place to start is with all your favorite books. Go to the acknowledgement page and see if they've acknowledged their agent or editor, and just keep a list of those names handy. And then whenever they pop up on Google or social media, follow them, Google them, that kind of thing. That'll get you a good start.
There are also books written by, for instance, agents. I've gone blank on a very, very well-known agent in my early career, Richard. He actually wrote a book.
How to write a blockbuster.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember his name.
Yeah, but there are books by agents and by publishers about the fields of publishing and agency, both. So it would not hurt to look, look up those subjects, either in a library where they actually have things listed by subject, old-fashioned bastards that they are, or on Amazon where you kind of go wandering through, poking things and using keywords. But basically, there are books about the publishing industry and agenting that will give you a lot of insights into how it works.
And online stuff everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of writers' blogs and things these days that you can find where people talk about their experiences and what's worked and what hasn't worked. So,
because that's the only thing we know, right? Like that's where I started. I still go to authors' blogs, agents' blogs, stuff like that. That's where the best, most real info is, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for your time. This is wonderful.
Thank you for being here.
Another query letter question. I find that in trying to introduce the novel and the world, having to boil that down to 3 sentences, I end up with something that sounds exactly like every other fantasy book that has ever been written. How do I preserve a little bit of voice and make it stand out while still presenting the bare bones of what it is?
And this should also go to Matt, so I'm just saying something first. If it's going to, first of all, that doesn't really necessarily belong in the query letter if you're also sending material. You don't need to spend a lot of time because, to be honest with you, unless your concept is as you said, is something so far from the norm that it instantly grabs people. you're going to do it a disservice by boiling it down too much. Whereas if you give somebody more of a category idea, you could say, you know, this is an epic fantasy, but the main protagonists happen to be professional golfers, you know, and whatever, you know, something that lifts it out. But if you don't have that, my suggestion, again, I'll defer to Matt on this, but my suggestion is to let your material do the work. Because if there's not much in your query letter, there's not much to piss them off, and they will continue on to read whatever section that they're sending in.
Good query letters are really hard to write. Like, I sort of do that when I have to write a submission letter, because it's kind of like writing a query letter. How do I get an editor's eye? And actually, I'm somewhat good at it, but my assistant, who's also a writer, is amazing at it. I would just say you have to try and make it stand out. But there are two ways to make something stand out. There's making three ways, actually. Your background is one, making you stand out because you seem educated about the business and know whose clients this person has. Like if someone says, I know you represent Tad Williams and Patrick Rothfuss and CJ Cherry, like I'll immediately, the person has my attention because they've done their homework. They're at the top of, now I have to like what the query is, but I'm already kind of like, okay, you got my attention. And then the third is making it kind of pop as to what your concept is, and that's hard. But maybe getting friends to proofread it and help you is a good way.
Now, you just told me a story yesterday about a query that you received that was kind of clunky and not that great. But then you read the manuscript, and the manuscript was brilliant.
No, my assistant got all excited that she found this book, and we haven't sold it yet. We've been giving, the two of us have been giving lots of feedback. I think we're on round 4. But I said, can I see the query letter? I'm just curious. And I read the query letter, and I said, how did you ask for this? Like, it's so, like his writing is so much better. It's like just the kind of like, you know, generic query letter. She said, I don't know, I just had a feeling. But so, thank goodness Christine was there.
We have 5 minutes, so if we're going to get to the questions, we need to just let you guys know.
Yes, okay.
Hi, thank you. My question is in regards to querying a book which is a series. As I'm fine-tuning my own query letter, I know that the school of thought is to say in your query letter that this is a book with series potential. However, if you feel that your book really can't stand alone, is there any advice that you would give on how to query a book of that nature?
Well, in this genre, which is science fiction and fantasy, it's kind of a given that most of these books are not standalone, but I'll tell you what you should not do. Don't say it's an 8-book series or something. Some people do, and I've even had that with clients. Did I have that with you, Scott? It was going to be 5 books? No, it's going to be...
No.
That's me. That's me.
Oh, yeah,
I'm the one with the 5-book series that we haven't told our publisher.
We had this friendly back and forth. I said, I'm not saying it's 5 books. Don't throw it away. Like, yeah, we could say it's the first in a trilogy because that's like trilogies they're used to hearing. So, what was your? So did I answer the question?
Do you say it's the first in a series?
Yeah, you can. Sure.
I did. That's where I left it.
Yeah, that's a good indeterminate term that's not going to freak people out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so, I'm too short. So with regards to querying, should you, this might be common knowledge already, but should you query one agent at a time or multiple at once? And
That's a very good question.
if you do query multiple at once, can you send out like the same standard query letter that you gave one agent, or should every one be unique?
You can query multiple agents at once, and I would try to make them each unique. You don't have to change like what the pitch is, but you could say, dear Matt, I know you represent blah, blah, blah. I think my book might fall into line with some of the clients I see you represent, and then the rest of it could be the same for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm just at the very end here. So I'd just like to say, first of all, thanks, Matt, for encouraging people to be in writing groups. I run a writing group locally, and we have a lot of success for our writers that were not doing anything before. but my question's actually for Scott. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you courted Matt and how you prepared for that ahead of time? Because a lot of us focus on query letters, but I'm more, even though I'm a writer, I feel more personable doing that sort of thing. So how did that work for you?
Booze, chocolate, and flowers.
I actually did promise another agent chocolate, but I'm not gonna. Yeah. So I've got like 15 seconds to answer this. I'll let them or Brian cut me off. But long story short, I did my homework. I had two, kind of three agents that I really liked. Two of them were going to be at a convention. I flew out to that convention. It was a convention in the UK. I figured there wouldn't be a whole lot of Americans there, and they represent Americans, so I figured it was great. I was really impressed with Matt, and so I got his card. I was pretty sure he wasn't going to remember me, so when I sent him a query, I was pretty sure I wanted him, and so I said, in the subject line, I said exclusive query to let him know that, hey, I want you, and I want you for a reason, right? I don't know if that helped, but it worked for some reason, so it didn't hurt. And yeah, the rest is history.
You mentioned where you met him. I know that because
Correct.
you said.
Correct. Yeah, I mentioned where I met him, and
Yeah,
yeah.
that was the key. I remembered who you were.
Yeah.
And that's why these things are great. It's a great chance to meet people in the field, this and science fiction conventions and stuff like that. But then you have to reconnect them to whatever conversation you had with them. Because we all have lots of conversations at conventions.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everybody.